Thank you, Dr. Melfi. And good morning, members of the EACTS community. My name is Amy Kerdok, and I'm delighted and honored to be here today to share with you an engineer's perspective on nearly 20 years of surgical innovation. These are my disclosures. I'd like to start with a quote from perhaps an unlikely source, the 1911 children's novel, A Secret Garden. At first, people refuse to believe that a strange new thing can be done. Then they begin to hope it can be done. Then they see it can be done, and then it is done, and all the world wonders why it was not done centuries ago. To me, this is the definition of a paradigm shift. And what can cause a paradigm shift? I believe innovation can. So what I hope you get out of the next 30 minutes or so is that in order for innovation to create a paradigm shift in any field, you first must focus on the problem you're trying to solve, and not necessarily the technology that you can build. I think the biggest mistake that somebody can make is to build technology for technology's sake. Or in the age of AI, use data for data's sake. You need to be able to make products, to make products that matter, you need to do these three things. You first need to understand the problem. Listen to the people that are using and abusing your product. Observe them doing that in their environment. See how they're solving the problem in other ways. And when you truly understand the problem, you then want to explore broadly. You want to cast a wide net. Reach out to your interdisciplinary peers and to other fields, because the right solution is often not the obvious one. And third, to stay curious. Innovation is a nonlinear journey. And as you're understanding the problem and exploring the solution space broadly, you're going to come up with more problems and more solutions than you know what to do with. So hang on to them, because they'll come in handy later. So I was asked to, I'm going to start off by talking a little bit on how the daughter of a calligrapher and a haberdasher ended up as an engineer in medtech. Well, I've always liked building things. And in particular, I really like the tools that you use to build things. One could say I like building the tools better than the thing I built. I also have been an avid athlete my whole life, and that sparked a curiosity in understanding how the human body works, as well as the interaction of the human body with its environment, or the man-machine interface. And then I had a bad accident when I was about 8 years old, and I was told I may never walk again. That was motivation for an active kid to learn how to get better quick. And I became fascinated with surgery, with the people that put me back together, physical therapy, and the whole world of medicine. And then, when I was in high school, we didn't call it STEM then, but I was interested in math, science, art, music. I didn't know what the E was. And actually, my physics teacher, my junior year, said to me, "Amy, I think you should be an engineer." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And a couple days later, I came back to Dr. Roche, and I said, "Why do you want me to drive a train?" I literally had no idea what an engineer was. And he sat me down, and we looked at some schools in New England and beyond, and figured out that there was a career called biomedical engineering. And that sounded perfect for me to fulfill my interests. Well, my desire for continued learning led me to graduate school. And that path ultimately led me to surgical robotics. And when I was listening to Dr. Melfi's interview with EACTS, I heard her say that she kind of stumbled upon surgical robotics by chance. Well, I imagine that's the case for many of you in the room. It certainly was for me. I started off in sports biomechanics, studying the energetics and running on compliant surfaces, which I obviously did not do very well, because 4 days ago I fell and got a black eye, so that's why I look like this. But partway through that research, my advisor died an untimely death. And I ended up having to finish that work as a master's at what's called the MIT Leg Lab. And that's where I got introduced to robots. They were running robots. They weren't surgical robots, but robots nonetheless. And I decided to stick with my graduate work and started over again with a PhD from the Harvard Biorobotics Lab, where I was a tissue mechanist studying surgical simulation. The point of that story is that I too stumbled upon surgical robots. It was a nonlinear path, but it kickstarted my career And it was because I was listened to opportunity. So once I finished my degree, my friends and family all thought I was nuts. This was 2006. And I became a clinical development engineer at Intuitive Surgical. Again, 2006. This was early on in the surgical robotics evolution, if you will. This is the Da Vinci S system. Some of you may never have seen it before. But despite coming from a surgical robotics lab, my friends, my family, even my lab thought I was nuts to leave Massachusetts, drive 3,000 miles away, some company nobody ever heard of in California, and replace surgeons with C-3PO and R2-D2. Well, it was my belief then, and it still is now, that it's not robotic surgery. It's not replacing you all with robots. It's computer-aided medicine. What's computer-aided medicine? It's using technology and information as tools to enable you all to perform more effective minimally invasive surgery, because we know that's better for patients. I believed then, and I still do now, that the incisions of open surgery were going to get smaller and smaller. The capabilities of interventional radiology were going to get more advanced, and those two worlds would someday become indiscernible. So I'm going to take you on a little history right now, about 50 years worth here, to talk about how an innovation in one field drastically changed our field. And what was that innovation? It was the invention of a portable TV camera. In the 1970s, Philips invented the portable TV camera, and Dr. Sem was the first to use it in performing surgeries. He broadcasted his surgery for educational purposes. Then in the 80s, Cameron Najat took that one step further and really pioneered video laparoscopic surgery. And he even showed that video laparoscopy was more effective than laparotomy. And then in the 90s, the first surgical robot was created called ASOP, the Automatic Endoscope System for Optimal Positioning. Basically, you needed to not have a shaky camera. And so this robot was invented for that, and the surgeon could free up their hands, didn't need an assistant, and could control the camera position either with their hands, their feet, or voice activation. Well, ASOP didn't survive, but as we know, in the 2000s, the Da Vinci became approved, I think in 1999, and robotic surgery as we know it took off. But in terms of vision, what the Da Vinci had to offer was that 3D, HD, immersive vision, allowing surgeons to internalize their interactions with tissue in detail, or what I like to call visual haptics. And Intuitive solved this by having two cameras and a console with a TV for each eye so that you could fuse the image in 3D. Well, in 2009, James Cameron in Hollywood figured out how to have that same 3D experience on a 2D screen from the movie Avatar. And soon after, Olympus and Sony and other companies were able to adopt that same technology to provide the 3D experience in the laparoscopic suite. And yesterday at Techno College, it was really fun because pretty much in every session, you guys got to wear the glasses and experience that 3D HD experience. And today, we have things like 4D transesophageal echo and ICE that are allowing heart teams clear, dimensional, non-direct visualization of their targets so that they can access and perform procedures in a transcatheter percutaneous manner. So what will the future bring? Well, AI and ML are already utilizing the vast amounts of video data that have been collected for clinical diagnostic and other applications. So that history was intended to show the paradigm shift. Literally, the entire field of minimally invasive surgery came about from the home video cameras that we all had in the 1980s. And so that computer-aided medicine, that paradigm shift, was really important. What I want to do now is give some personal examples on projects that I've worked on that also are in the field of surgical vision, where I'm going to employ those three principles of understanding the problem, exploring the solution space, and staying curious in order to come up with maybe some non-obvious solutions. Early in my career, one of the physicians I worked with, Dr. Arnie Advincula, said to me, "You should only cut what you can see. If you can't see it, you will likely cut it." It's a bit of a riddle, but one that makes complete sense. And I've shared with you so far about the cameras and endoscopes and displays that help surgical vision. But it got me thinking, how do you change your environment that you're operating in order to be able to see better? So asking questions a little slightly differently. So the 4 projects I'm going to talk about is how might we see beneath the surface? How might we see around obstacles? How might we see through obstacles? And how might we see together? The first project, seeing beneath the surface. So the problem was, as you're dissecting and you're trying to get at your target, would there be a way to make that target more visible before you get there? Can we see beneath the white light surface? This is an interesting story on how this came to be. I may not have it right, but what I understand is that an executive from Eastman Kodak, the camera film company, his wife had gotten treated by Dr. Irvin Fox from the Mayo Clinic. And he was so happy with the treatment that he got, he asked Dr. Fox, how can I help? And Dr. Fox said, I would like a dye to be able to measure cardiac output. And so the executive went back to Kodak, looked at the dyes that he had on the shelf, and discovered that ICG, indocyanine green, which was invented in the 1950s for Ratten filters, actually had the right chemical and biological properties, and it could potentially work. So with collaborations with other companies and several years later, it actually became the first FDA-approved sterile solution for pulse dye densitometry. And people called ICG cardio green or fox green at the time. Well, at Intuitive, we weren't in the business of making dyes, but we were curious and we wanted to know, could we too incorporate this dye into our system? Could we add a laser and the necessary filters to be able to excite the ICG and see its admittance on the 3D surgical display? And if we could, we would of course use it for cardiac applications, the same as Dr. Fox, but we also knew that ICG was excreted by the liver and was used for hepatic function. So could we use ICG to identify biliary anatomy? And if it's seen in vessels, could we use it to assess tissue perfusion? And if it's seen in vessels, those are tubular structures. What other tubular structures could we see? Could we see ureters? Could we see the lymphatic system? So the first thing we had to do was make it work. And actually the very first research project I did was with J. Michael Smith from Cincinnati, and we did a beating heart study on canines, where we just wanted to see, we finally figured out how to get it to see the ICG on the Da Vinci system. This is the SI system. And we used it. And we tried to see what we could see. And we could see the IMA, we could see the LAD, and as you can see from the video, we used it to assess the perfusion that we did after we performed the beating heart cabbage. Oftentimes I get asked why we chose a black and white image for this technology, which we named Firefly. And again, this was the SI system. We had white light, which we were just moving into LEDs as our light source, but it was actually a light bulb at the time. And in order to have the best signal to noise ratio, we decided to desaturate the image, which actually happened literally by accident in the lab one day. And then we can falsely color the emittance that we see with green. And that really gave us the confidence that where the ICG was is what you can see in the fluorescence. So that confidence continued. And despite the XI system having a chip on its technology, an LED light source, the black and white image is actually very effective at telling you exactly what you're looking for. And this is a paper I found on the left here of somebody injecting the dye into lung nodules and really being able to see where that lung nodule is in order to perform the segmentation in the correct place. In the upper middle, it is being used to identify ureters. Both of these two applications are off-label use at the moment. And in the upper right is tissue perfusion. So this was one of the original ideas and one of the older videos. But the idea here is in a colectomy, you do your dissection and you want to know where you're going to do your staple line. It needs to be nice, healthy tissue. The surgeon guessed where that healthy tissue was based on the white light image and was about 4 centimeters off when you then look at it in ICG under Firefly. The bottom right, it was indeed helpful and still is right out of the gate for identifying biliary anatomy, the common hepatic duct and its branches. And in the bottom middle there is sentinel lymph node mapping, which actually got approved for use, I believe, in late 2022. So the next problem I wanted to talk about was the ability to see around obstacles. How can we move tissue out of the way or bring it closer to you so that you may see and access it? Well, in investigating this problem, we wanted to understand how people did it now. What kind of retractors did they use? Did they use a Nathanson, like what's shown here, or a fan blade retractor? And in fact, we had a surgeon come to us and say, I really want you to build us a fan blade retractor. I'm going to put it in my third arm so that my assistant doesn't have to move the bowel out of the way for me. I want to be able to do it myself. We said, okay. And we built a fan blade retractor and invited the surgeon back to our lab. And he put it on the third arm and he moved the bowel out of the way. And he said, this is great. But now I've lost the use of my third arm. I need that for grasping tissue. So we solved the wrong problem. In fully understanding the problem, we went back and was like, okay, you need your assistant available. You need all three of your arms. How else are we going to move this bowel out of the way? Well, turns out that in laparoscopic surgery, you move the table a lot. And when you do it, you move it and you keep your camera and instruments in reference to the tissue that you're moving. So we had the crazy idea, what would it take to move the table while a patient is attached to a 2,000-pound robot? And how do we do that safely, not moving the cannulas or not harming the patient? And if we are able to do this, how much does the table need to move? And we need to be able to replicate that experience that people have in laparoscopic surgery where the camera somehow follows the motion of the table and the arms are available to interact with the tissue. Well, what came about is about a 6-year research project of really understanding this problem, and this actually set a lot of the specifications for the Da Vinci Xi system. What you see on the left is literally me riding an operating table, holding a camera, trying to understand what motions were needed to make the camera intuitive. Went around the world and various ORs to understand how much the table moves and in what procedures and for what reasons. And then a lot of time understanding the cannula. What kind of forces are needed to keep the cannula in place? Do we need to build new cannulas in order for this capability to happen? Several patents and papers came out of all of this work. And what we learned with the cannulas is that the abdominal body wall is really good at retaining them. And we could actually build the Da Vinci Xi with friction low enough that the cannulas could drag the robot and not move. Now, unfortunately, in your world, the intercostal space, the forces were a lot lower. And so initially, and I think it's still true, it's not indicated for use in thoracic or cardiothoracic surgery. However, being the champion that she was, Dr. Melfi invited us and our team to come to the University of Pisa to do our first in human studies there. And with her help, we were able to reach out to urology, gynecology, colorectal, general surgeons. We did over 30 cases, collected many, many data points. What you see in the bottom left is all of the places in red is where the table could move while attached to the robot. The little dots are all the places we went. So it was a great study in understanding the value of this. And as the video shows, this is a sigmoidectomy. The table literally is moving from 0 to 17 degrees in Trendelenburg. The camera and the surgeon's experience is just as if it's happening very naturally. The camera's following the table. The instruments are actually also following the table. The surgeon still has the ability to move the instruments. And in a second, you'll see he'll actually change the camera view and have the exposure that he needed for the sigmoid. So kind of an unusual solution to a vision problem, but one that I'm very proud of. The third project or problem is seeing through obstacles. So how can we remove smoke and debris that's generated during minimally invasive surgery? You've got a compact space and everything that you're doing is going to stay in that space. Well, in both laparoscopic and robotic surgery, people rely on an assistant using a suction irrigator and literally going into cases and seeing how often people suck versus irrigate and when. We also learned that assistants use it to retract tissue and in some cases, blunt dissection. So we wanted to know, could we build a wristed suction irrigator for the Da Vinci that could also be controlled by the surgeon console? And if it's controlled by the surgeon console, could we concurrently use monopolar energy and suction at the same time? Because they kind of go hand in hand. You're generating the smoke, suck the smoke away. And then we thought, wow, wouldn't it be great if we could integrate an insufflator into the system to close the loop and be able to do this automatically? Well, I love this picture in the upper left because this is true engineering here. We literally stuck a suction irrigator on, this part of this work was done on the SI system. And we tried to see if we could figure out how to use the Da Vinci to control suction and irrigation. And it sounds obvious now, but we actually took learnings from cardiology where you flex and roll in order to get good degrees of freedom, because we needed to free up 2 inputs in order to have the robot be able to do suction and irrigation. Well, we did that. As you can see in the video, we also did get a patent. Before this point, you couldn't press 2 pedals at the same time on the Da Vinci console, but now you could. You could do monopolar and suction at the same time. And we designed the tip for blunt dissection, which you can see here. This is me operating on a pig, so forgive the non-clinical expertise here. But I'm dissecting the pulmonary vessel, and we had to make sure that we made that tip soft enough so that it didn't damage the vessel. We obviously had to make it retract. And this is my favorite application here, is dual console, allowing the assistant to have active control of clearing your visual space while you're working. And obviously, it's a multifunction tool. It needed to suck up clots and debris, as well as smoke, and irrigate the field. So a very simple tool, but one that is very effective. And one of the things I love about this is it's a perfect example of that stay curious point. Because 3 generations of robot later, the Da Vinci 5 now has an integrated insufflator. And that insufflator allows you to maintain pressure when you apply suction. It can auto smoke evacuate when you cauterize. And my hope for the future, and I'm sure there's some intuitive people in here, is that we can use AI to see the smoke or the debris in the field and have this come on automatically. So my last example is about seeing and learning together. How might we have a shared experience and use that to also learn from one another? Well, as more surgeons were using the Da Vinci systems, it became apparent that teaching would be critical. And the surgical mantra of see one, do one, teach one starts with being able to see one. And so as you can see in that picture up there, how are your fellows and residents going to be able to have that shared 3D immersive experience that you're having if they can't see what you're seeing? And in both laparoscopic and open surgery, there's more than 2 active instruments. So if we can also allow that fellow or colleague to see what you're seeing, can we also have them use the third arm that is parked somewhere at the moment and have that be an active instrument? And there's 3 arms in the robot, and now there's 4 arms operating. What are we going to do with that 4th arm? Can we do something interesting there? And also, you've got kind of a teacher-student situation here. How do we stop them from doing something bad? Well, that I like to think about in driver's education. You've got the ability to step on the brake if you don't like what your student's doing. So we went off and tried to figure out if we could make a dual console system. This seems obvious now because you know that there is one, but at the time we didn't know if we could do this. And we also wanted to know how we could learn from gaming and simulation to take the data and the analytics off the system and use that as a training tool to help you improve your skills on the Da Vinci. So like I said, we went ahead and built a dual console system. Any user can see and experience that 3D HD experience. 2 surgeons can operate together, as I showed in that video with the suction irrigator. Either surgeon can stop the movement by pressing on the camera pedal. And we did put in something for that arm that wasn't being used. We put in a 3D pointer so that it can be used for asking questions or pointing out teaching. And we went ahead and built a simulator. We weren't sure actually originally if this dual console thing was going to take off, so we wanted another reason for somebody to want to use that other console. And so if you put a backpack on it, you can use it for training and simulation when it's not in use. And we built skills to just teach people the basic mechanics of how to use the Da Vinci system. But we also were able to take the data and analytics off the system and off your own surgeries and create SimNow that you guys have access to now to really help you track your progress, recommend opportunities for improvement. And my understanding is that SimNow is actually used to onboard and credential users. And the procedure-specific Sims are great. My said my PhD was in surgical simulation. We couldn't do that back in 2006 very well. So I spent the majority of this talk right now talking about surgery. I want to pivot a little bit and talk about the company I've been at for 2 years now called Capstan Medical. Capstan to me epitomizes computer-aided medicine by bridging interventional cardiology, cardiac surgery, and robotics together to try to come up with a minimally invasive solution for structural heart disease. So in understanding the problem, you all know that heart disease is the leading cause of death in the world. And within it, valvular heart disease impacts more than 70 million people worldwide, and that number is growing due to the aging population. We also know that in valvular heart disease, it impacts the entire heart, with about a quarter impacting the aortic valve, and the rest impacting the mitral and tricuspid or mixed valve disease. But despite the market and the need being there, treatments are extremely limited, and they favor the less prevalent valve. Well, why is that? The aortic valve is a straight shot. It's easy to access, its environment is favorable, and so it has offered itself to good minimally invasive percutaneous solutions. The mitral and the tricuspid valves, not so much. 2% of people that need these valves treated get the treatment, and it's because access is difficult. It's really hard to access, particularly the mitral valve, in a complex 3D anatomy, difficult anatomy with calcified mitral valves, difficult sizes, and a high pressure situation. On the right side, you've got the conduction system. So at Capstan, we set out, given those access issues, I was shocked to learn that this is still the standard of care for these patients. Now, sure, surgical robotics and minimally invasive techniques have gotten rid of the sternotomy in many cases, and I saw some beautiful examples of that yesterday. But you still need to stop the heart, and we know that that leads to stroke and bleeding complications. So at Capstan, we feel like in order to treat the mitral and the tricuspid valve in a minimally invasive manner, you need to focus on the valve. You need to make that valve compatible with patient anatomies. Over 80% of patient anatomies are incompatible with the current Gen 1 and Gen 2 devices that are being developed right now. So what we did is we're taking the learnings again from interventional cardiology and cardiac surgery in order to design a valve that has the durability, precision, and effectiveness of a surgical valve, but we can deliver it into that complex 3D space in a minimally invasive way using the reproducible precision and confidence that a robotic platform can bring. So at Capstan, we kind of backed into a robot in order to deliver the right valve. What I'll show you on the next screen here is a water tank version of the system. We are still preclinical. The next slide, I'll show you some animal data. But this is a top-down view on the left. Yes, your left. Showing, an AP view. And I'll just play the video and speak to it. So the point of the water tank here is to show the maneuverability. Our catheter is coming through the septal crossing there. We've got a short, maybe 35, 40 millimeter rigid length that makes us not dependent upon where we cross the septum. A lot of the devices out there right now, you have to be specifically 3.8 millimeters above the mitral annulus plane, but we don't feel like we need that. We also have 8 degrees of freedom in our catheter that allows us to precisely position the valve where we want to in the mitral annulus. It's controlled by just an off-the-shelf controller. Again, we're preclinical. Yes, that is an Xbox controller controlling the robot. And one of the unique things is that you'll see right here is when we unsheath, nothing happens. So the valve stays put, it does not move, and we slow and control open the valve in a 3-stage process, and we can still exactly reposition the valve at any point until it's completely released. This allows us to build a really, really compact valve. And you'll see as it's going, I should point out, there's a graphical user interface that's got a little cartoon that's telling you the commanded motions and some navigational cues. After the second stage here, our bioprosthetic, we use a bovine valve, is actually functional. So we don't believe we need to pace the patient in this procedure. And when we're ready, we deploy the valve. And we have a very short protrusion into the left ventricle, maybe 10 millimeters. So we don't think that will block the left ventricular outflow tract. And the valve itself has a not a rigid, but a stable core and a flexible outer frame so that it can conform to the patient's anatomy. On this slide, this is a recent porcine example. This is an LAO view, so the catheter is kind of coming up at you. You can see that on the virtual catheter with a crazy twist in it that we can only probably achieve because of our degrees of freedom. But the left atrium is only 3 centimeters high in this pig. We identify the mitral plane by putting a wire in the coronary sinus, and we've got some puffs of contrast happening under the mitral leaflets. We have unsheathed. The valve is not deployed. Our barbs are exposed at this point, so we are past the point of no return. This valve is going in this heart. And we're going through our 3-stage deployment process right now. Capstan is the name of the company. For those of you that are sailors, that is the way to kind of furl and unfurl sails. That is the mechanism of action of our valve. And right now, the valve is fully functional. I'm sorry, I don't have a picture of the echo here so that you can see that. But our valve is fully functional, and you'll see in just a second that we will release it. And it's kind of a non-event, which is exciting. It's easy to navigate away, and once you do, you can see that it's an effective valve. We have no paravalvular leak, we have no left ventricular outflow tract obstruction, and in the pig, again, we're only 1 centimeter above the mitral annulus. So I've shown you how a robot can really help in simplifying maneuvering in a complex 3D space. Well, we also think that we can use the robot preoperatively to come up with a pre-planned path that the robot can take to optimally place our valve in the specific patient that you're working with. So we can take that plan, we can take the patient anatomy and put it in a simulator and let you drive and figure out your procedure basically before you have to do your procedure. And in a recent lab, we played with this and it worked quite nicely. And the user was able to focus on where he wanted to place the valve, the desired final position, and not have to think about the complex compound motions of the robotic catheter. So in summary with Capstan, it is a computer-aided medicine solution for structural heart. In understanding the problem of valvular heart disease, we realized that it was accessing the space and being able to make a valve that fit the environment that was missing. And so we reached out to interventional cardiology, structural heart, cardiac surgery, and robotics together to build a valve and a delivery system that can work together to try to fit all patient anatomies, to minimize the patient inclusion issue that's happening right now, and then utilize robotic control to simplify those compound movements and give you a very repeatable, reliable user experience. But we're still staying curious. The pre-planned pathway for optimizing for the patient is new. The FDA does not like the word automated, and this isn't automated. This is just helping you drive along a path with rails, if you will. You can always take yourself off the rails and adjust the position yourself. And what I've shown you right now is the mitral valve, but this platform absolutely allows us to build tricuspid, aortic repair devices so that we can treat patients across their lifetime. In closing, I hope that this journey has made you all aware that we are indeed in a paradigm shift due to computer-aided medicine and cardiothoracic surgery, that those incisions of the open heart days are getting smaller, the interventional radiology capabilities are getting bigger, that the power of AI and ML will undoubtedly change the way in which we do surgery in the future. And it's just an extremely exciting time. So my call to action is to bring us back to these 3 points. What will the next paradigm shift be in our field? Well, we need to work together to understand the problem. Conferences like this, the Innovation Summit that I heard about yesterday, allowing people like me to come into your ORs, having you come into our labs, that's how we're going to understand what problems need to be solved and looking at the different possibilities for solving them. As John Dewey said, a problem well stated is a problem half solved. I like that a lot. And of course, staying curious so that we can evolve our innovation in the future. And with that, I'd like to thank you. And I'd like to thank Dr. Melfi. She not only makes a great table model for when we did our table motion studies, but she's a fabulous role model for all of us, I think, in this room, and particularly women in science and technology and medicine. Thank you, Dr. Melfi. Your drive, your willingness to pull us all together, your curiosity will absolutely help us change the future of medicine. And with that, thank you.
for this outstanding lecture. And it was a very impressive, yes, very impressive. And I'm sure that the audience enjoyed a lot about you.
Thank you.
Our secretary.
I know we have a lot of innovators in the room, so are there any questions from the floor? I guess the presentation was outstanding and so clear.
There we go. Thank you. Bye-bye. See you. Absolutely.